Welcome back to the announcement stage for our final announcement of the APEC CEO Summit. Last, and certainly not least, I'm excited to introduce an announcement from Boeing. They'll be highlighting an announcement under APEC's Green and Sustainable pillar, which includes investments that will support the clean energy transition and sustainable business practices across APEC economies. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome the moderator for this announcement, Joe Wingber-Muley.
Welcome, and thank you for being here today for our announcement. I am Joe Wingber-Muley from Boeing Communications, and I have the pleasure of introducing these four lovely folks. To my right, Boeing Chief Sustainability Officer, Chris Raymond, Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Economic Business Affairs of the U.S. State Department, Ramin Toloy, Australian Ambassador to the U.S., Kevin Rudd, and Executive Director, APEC Secretariat, Dr. Rebecca Fatima Santamaria. So over to you, Chris, to tell us about this exciting news.
Thank you, Joe. This morning, President Biden made a reference to the 1993 APEC meeting and talked about deepening a sense of community. And when we come to this APEC some 30 years later, we're talking about how to build a resilient and sustainable future together. So for the vast Asia-Pacific region, a lot of that connectiveness, a lot of that humanity, a lot of that relationship and trust and the economic development is driven by aviation. But in aviation, the one thing that science and data and a lot of our digital tools like Cascade Climate Impact Model teach us, we're going to need a lot of sustainable aviation fuel in the future. So today, Boeing is honored to partner with the United States Department of Transportation, the Federal Aviation Administration, and those in the APEC region to announce a SAF collaboration initiative. And the intent of this initiative is really to build upon the great work that's been happening in the emergent APEC economies around sustainable aviation fuel, emergent work like building supply chains, emergent work like forming policies that will incentivize the production of these fuels in the future. This is going to take a lot of collaboration to attract the capital we need to build an industry as big as the one we need for global aviation and sustainable aviation fuels. So we're honored to be here to deepen these partnerships with APEC economy countries that we've had for years, in some cases with SAF. We're honored to sit alongside the U.S. government to announce this collaboration and partnership within the APEC community. And with that, I'd just like to introduce Ramin to come tell you a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's delightful to be here. Pleased to join this event to announce the partnership between U.S. government agencies and industry to advance our climate goals with APEC economies. I'm pleased to represent the U.S. government. I'm pleased because I care about these climate issues, and I'm pleased because I'm a pilot, so I have a particular interest in developments in aviation. The effort today continues the active role that the U.S. has in promoting sustainable aviation fuel within APEC economies. Of particular note, and I'd like to thank the instrumental role that Boeing has had in the three-part webinar series on APEC sustainable aviation policies and strategy, sponsored by New Zealand this year, both as the primary supporter and in providing significant content. The United States looks forward to continuing efforts to address this important topic through the APEC Transportation Working Group. These efforts offer an opportunity to share the lessons learned from U.S. domestic programs. The Federal Aviation Administration is co-leading the U.S. government's Sustainable Aviation Fuel Grand Challenge, focusing federal efforts to enable a dramatic expansion of domestic SAF production to 3 billion gallons per year by the end of the decade, in line with industry goals, and 35 billion gallons per year by 2050, enough to meet 100% of projected domestic jet fuel demand. Provisions in the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act seek to provide incentives to boost domestic production of SAF and bridge the cost gap between SAF and petroleum jet fuel. The IRA tax credits for SAF production provide up to $1.75 per gallon for fuels that demonstrate the greatest reductions of life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. While the U.S. federal government is committed to pushing forward on SAF production, we cannot do it without the combined effort from the entire private sector and international partners, including feedstock and fuel producers, supply chain participants, manufacturers, air carriers, corporations who fly, and members of the flying public. Sustainability is at the heart and the forefront of our diplomatic agenda, and President Biden discussed this during his remarks before the CEO summit earlier today. We are committed to addressing the challenges of climate change from the position of the U.S. government. At the 41st session of the ICAO Assembly last year, member states adopted a collective long-term global aspirational goal, or LTAG, for international aviation of net zero carbon emissions by 2050 in support of the Paris Agreement's temperature goal. States acknowledge that sustainable aviation fuels offer the greatest potential for decarbonizing aviation. To tackle the immense challenges of scaling sustainable aviation fuels and decarbonizing aviation, we need to work together across the entire value chain. And to that end, I'm pleased this program will offer APEC member states, member economies, the opportunity to exchange information and best practices and promote the use of sustainable aviation fuel by the region's airlines to position the region to become a leader in SAF development and deployment. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn the podium over to Ambassador Rudd.
Thank you, Ramin. I'm intimidated by the fact that Ramin's a pilot. When I began my public political career, we were still flying biplanes. Is that together with you, Brendan Nelson? That takes us back some ways. Reflecting on APEC is important on an occasion such as this, because we're now 30 years in to this extraordinary institution. Certainly the reason I'm here is because I believe in three things. One is I believe in climate change. The second is I believe in civil aviation. And the third is I therefore believe in SAF. And one follows from the other. When you look at APEC's extraordinary evolution over the last 3 decades, you've seen the gleam in some folks' eyes slowly turn into a reality. The gleam in some folks' eyes way back when was to bring the economies of the Asia-Pacific region into an open community. The level of protectionism between economies way back then was huge. It's much less now, although the tide of protectionism is still around. Secondly, over time, we focused APEC's mind also on the climate change challenge. So this was not simply economic development for its own sake, it was sustainable development within the parameters of the planetary boundaries we all faced. And APEC itself, given the sheer scale of its population, nearly 3 billion people, that's a truckload of people. And therefore, in a region as vast as this, the civil aviation needs are huge, and therefore the sustainable airline fuel needs are huge as well. We represent such a large slice of the world's population across the APEC family. In fact, if we added India, we would be close to 2/3 of the world's population. Australia itself, by area, is the 6th largest country in the world. We are the 54th largest country in terms of population. So we use planes to get around a bit. It's one follows from the other. And therefore, as a nation, we have an intrinsic interest in the future of SAF as well. The carbon footprint of APEC is massive. In fact, whether we can achieve the UN's targets of keeping global temperature increases within 1.5 degrees centigrade by century's end will largely depend upon we, the economies of this region, do, plus India. If we don't, if we fail, it'll be because of us. Hence why the action must happen here. And that's why I'm delighted to be here with Brendan Nelson and Chris Raymond of Boeing, with Ramin Toloui of the State Department, and the APEC Executive Director, Rebecca Fatima Santamaria, to launch this new Sustainable Aviation Fuel Initiative. SAF will be essential if we are to bring about net zero for this sector. Australia welcomes Boeing's initiative with the US government to promote consideration of SAF across the APEC economies. Earlier this year, Boeing partnered with Australia's National Research Agency, the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, otherwise called the CSIRO, or CSIRO, to publish a SAF roadmap for our country. Not long after that, Australia and the US recognised the importance of collaboration to accelerate the development and deployment of SAF as part of the Critical Minerals, Climate and Clean Energy Transformation Compact signed by President Biden and Prime Minister Albanese in Japan only 6 months ago. The inclusion of a SAF-focused project under APEC reflects our collective interest in growing the industry in support of the aviation sector in achieving net zero. So we congratulate the US, we congratulate APEC, and we congratulate Boeing for being partners in this important piece of climate change and civil aviation progress. Congratulations, one and all.
And then we will welcome Dr. Rebecca.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. Just to draw our attention to what was happening outside, I'm not sure whether it's still happening outside, but a couple of days ago we were stuck in traffic as there were the protests. And part of the protests were about sustainability and inclusion. And here we are in APEC, that's our raison d'etre. We've been talking about sustainability and inclusion, but clearly the folks out there don't seem to realize this. So clearly we're not doing our job. Our messaging is really falling short. So I am so happy to be here to witness this engagement, this initiative, which is so important, and we need to get this, we need to tell folks more about this. Even the leaders, when they were talking today, when they were sharing with each other, the whole idea of turning rhetoric into action, we need more action is what they were saying. So, and they also said that we need more public-private sector participation and collaboration and more private sector investment. And this is, for me, really reassuring as we see this whole conversation around sustainability and sustainable aviation fuel, which is so important for us, becoming a reality, starting here. So I am so pleased to be here, and I'm really, really fortunate and honored to be here to witness this happening here. So thank you very much for including me in this event, and I wish to see this really expanding and growing. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your inspiring words. Really appreciate you being here, and thank you. If there are any questions after, please come and find me. But that will bring us to a close. Thanks.